passwords. What we're going to go over today is AESIS basics. So if at any time you feel like you've heard this again and you're not wanting to hear it again, feel free, if you're a veteran AESIS user, to hop off. Or if you feel like you need a refresher, you can stay on. There's no pressure there. But we're going to go through, start at the very beginning, start with the basics, and then here probably in October we will have a more advanced AESIS training, so we can kind of break it up and then have those also recorded so people can view them if they need a refresher or if they weren't able to attend. So I think the first thing with all of our data collection, specifically AESIS, is how do you get to the website? There are a couple ways. I'm going to show the manual way first, and then I think the easiest thing is to just bookmark or memorize the web address for the login page. But if you go to kansasregents.org, which you should be able to see shared on your screen right now, you see the Kansas Board of Regents website. At the top in this navigation bar here, you have About, Academic Affairs, and Data. If you hover over Data and then go down to About, Data Research and Planning, and go over and click Data Collections, that will take you to a quick overview of what the Kansas Higher Education Data System is, why it exists. For our purposes, that's not as important as this link up in the top right of that screen that says Login. So if you click that, you'll get a pop-up message. A lot of the reports in AESIS or in KEDS or in our other data collection systems come up as pop-ups. So you'll want to make sure that you don't have a pop-up blocker turned on, or things might not work correctly. So you just click OK to acknowledge that, and then it will take you to the login page. What I think is the easiest thing to do is just memorize the login page. It's submission, as in data submission, .kansasregents.org. Again, it'll bring up that acknowledgement. But when you do, if you bookmark the page, make sure that you bookmark just submission.kansasregents.org. You might notice at different times in the address bar, there might be an extension, login.jsp, or it might be something longer. Sometimes you can bookmark a specific function or page if you're not careful, and that might cause an error when you're trying to log in. So make sure that your bookmark is just this that's displayed in my address bar now, so that you have the best experience. One of the first things I like to refresh everyone on, we have new people coming in into our programs. Hopefully we're not losing people who were here, but as we bring new people on and they need an account in AESIS, I'd like to remind everyone that we do not create those for you. The user or a program staff member on behalf of that person needs to navigate to this web page and click this link here, apply for a new account. Then there's an agreement here about technology use, things like that. Read through it, and if you agree and acknowledge, click I agree. And this allows the person or you on their behalf to create their own user ID, their own password, and enter the information. A couple things with this. Make sure their name matches the name that you will eventually create on the staff profile that we'll talk about here in a moment. Make sure the email address is the institution email address, because that is where password resets will be sent, That's also how we verify identities as well. So make sure that it's that institution email address that they have. And then down towards the bottom. Yeah, thank you for that. Down towards the bottom, the institution, you'll first need to select a project, which would be the ABE/Pablo. They're going to update this at some point to AESIS, but Pablo is what our data system used to be called. So you would select that, and then you would select your institution or school. For new employees, or even if you're setting up an account, please pay attention, because this has a historical record of every institution that's ever offered adult education services. So there are some that don't exist anymore. University of St. Mary is one. It's still a university in Kansas, but they no longer have an adult ed program. Or over time, we've had programs that have joined forces, programs that have combined. We have a couple of consortiums. So Butler, as an example, if you had a new person coming on board at Butler, you would need to select this Butler Community College 2 entities, because that is the current institution in our system under which all of their student data is saved. So if anyone ever has any questions about which one do you pick, it's pretty much always going to be the one with the multiple entities, but you can always ask us which one you should choose, and we're more than happy to provide that for you. Once you do that, you'll be asked project access. You'll need to select either read, which would be about 95–99% of your users, or write, which means that that person can enter or change student data. You would want as few of your users as possible to have that. That way you only have a couple people who can make changes. And then a reason for account: new instructor, new director, new program staff, and then you would click apply. And then that sends a message to myself, and we will get that approved. One thing we're going to talk about once we get logged into AESIS, however, is that I can't approve that account until someone who's an existing Write user, so your data person or your program director, has created a corresponding staff profile. So you'll need to enter your new instructors, your new staff members into AESIS, so that when they apply for an account, that is a check that we use to ensure that the person applying for an account really should have one. So if we don't have that corresponding staff profile to match to, we can't create the new account. And if you are whiteboarding, please don't. And then if you already have an account that has Write access and you change roles within an institution, you would not need a new account. But we might need to change your account status. So that's something that we can go over once we get logged in. There's a way to request a new account status to move from read user to write user. So going back to that login page, the other thing we'll talk about before we get into AESIS itself is if you've forgotten your password, don't email IR help. They won't be able to change your password, or they may be able to in extreme circumstances if your account is locked. But there is an automated process, like most websites that you would log into. You click Forgot Password, enter your user ID, your last name, and your email address, certify that you're not a robot, and then it will send a password reset token to your email. Once you have done that, there is an option on the login page to reset password with a token. So once you've received that token, you would come back here. You usually get it within a minute or so. Click password reset token, your user ID, enter the token, put in your new password, and then again, certify you're not a robot, and you'll be able to reset that. So as we look at those basic account creation and login procedures, does anyone have any questions at this point?
Can you change a name without creating a new account? Say somebody's had a name change.
That is a great question, Angie. When we log in, we'll look at that change access procedure. I think you might be able to do it that way. So let me check. We'll get to that. And then we'll, if not, we'll probably have to go through a manual process to have it done on the back end. But let's check that. So to get logged in, you would enter that username and password, click login, which will bring you to the AESIS main page. So the first thing when you get logged in, if you're a new user and you've never logged in before, you will actually be taken to this page where you would set your institution, your fiscal year, and your quarter. That's also, if you're working, you're comparing years, looking at data, that's how you would change from FY19 to 20 to 21. So to do that, from this main page, you still have that top bar that's on all the pages. Then you have over on the left, it tells you what collection you're in. So AESIS, ABE. If you were in KEDS, which is the higher ed data system, it would tell you that you were in KEDS. It tells you your name, the institution you're currently logged in under. So if you're at Lawrence or Dodge City Community College, Garden City, Hutch, that would be listed there. It will tell you the quarter you have selected, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, and then it will tell the current fiscal year that you're in. Particularly if you're a Write user, there are, right now is a good example, we just closed FY20, but when we're changing fiscal years, take extra caution to ensure that you are in and you're editing data in the right fiscal year. You don't want to accidentally add things to the previous year that you meant to add to the current year, and then have to go back and change that later. So to change your institution, your fiscal year or your quarter, you would click this change profile. And when we talk about things later, like the follow-up collection, we'll talk about your AESIS profile status, and this is where you would set those things. This is also where you would manually change your password over here on the right. And this is where you would update account information. And then you can also view a list of other users at your institution. So first, before we get to answering Angie's question, we'll go through how to set your AESIS profile status. So institution, at the Board of Regents, we have access to all of your institutions, plus several test institutions that we use. You would not see more than one. Individuals who've been here long enough, and maybe individuals from Butler might be a good example. If they were here before Butler and Wichita Chinese Center sort of joined forces to deliver programming, they might have access to Butler Community College and Butler Community College, two entities. But by and large, most of you will only see the single institution, so you won't have to worry about changing this. But you can set that to your institution. Quarter, for most things, quarter does not matter. when you're entering student data, attendance, test scores, it doesn't matter what quarter you have selected. AESIS is a cumulative database. So you can't go back and just look at data that was entered in the first quarter, look at data that was entered in the fourth quarter. The data that's in AESIS is in AESIS. Where this really comes into play is when you're doing and entering follow-up collections, which we'll talk about here towards the end of the training today. So if you're just pulling reports, looking at your students in your class to see what their progress has been, you won't really have to worry about quarter. But if you're downloading and uploading those follow-up reports to see wage and post-secondary progress of students, you'll need to make sure that you set that right before you're doing those things. And then the fiscal year, for most of you, depending, some of those combined institutions may not have it, but we should have data going back to 2003. So more than likely, you're going to want to stay, or you're going to want to be looking at the current years to kind of see where we've been, where we're at. So we'll stay in 2021. And then when we were talking about creating an account, every once in a while you might need someone who needs to update their account information, particularly changing user status. So Angie, it does look like you could change name here. I am not going to request that, but if you have someone who has a name change, go ahead and have them enter the new name. And when they update it, if it's something that is, Kayla Harity's requested to change access. The training's already getting good results. So go ahead and have her change it. If there's something that I need to approve, I should get a notification. Here's where you would also request your change to access. I obviously have access to multiple data collections here. The one that most of you would be worried about would be here. You could request to change from a read user to a write user. If you, like I said, if you've had a change in role, you don't need a new account. We can change the access level that you have. Some of you might have access to KSPSD, which is something we kind of use interchangeably with KEDS. So if you have questions about changing access, you can always reach out to us.
So you can change your name, but your user ID stays the same.
It does stay the same.
Okay. I guess that was my question.
Okay, yeah. For that, I mean, if it's a big enough deal, we could always have a new account created with, but you'd have to use a new email address. So we'll go through. We can talk about that separately if you have a specific case you're wanting to address. So again, setting that AESIS profile. Due to FERPA, I can't show you anyone else's institution, so we have a test institution that we use. We'll stay in FY 2021 and look. For those of you who have not used AESIS before, it's not super complicated as far as what you can do, where you can go. A lot of it's centered around the student data that you collect and you give to us so that we can track and report progress. But we have a couple main sections. The first one under this main menu here would be the student section. This is where we have a more robust student search tool where you can search by social security number, first name, last name. You can also, a trick if you just want to pull every student at your institution, if you leave each of these fields blank, you can just click search and it will pull up. For this test institution, we have 8 students. but your institution would have many more, and it will show every single one. Then if you're a right user, this is where you would be able to add a student. Local programs cannot delete students. You would need to request that from KBOR staff. With WIOA, we now have to report on the number of reportable individuals. So that's anyone who sought basic information only services. So if you collected any data on that individual, we report them as a number. But that means that we would not delete students who've been entered into AESIS. The only time we would do that is if a student was accidentally rolled from one fiscal year to the next. We can delete them. But if you think you might need to delete a student, just reach out and we can work through that. Then we have our reports that we'll go through towards the end of today. Basic aggregate reports. We have some list reports, disaggregate reports that break students out by different demographics, age, race, ethnicity, things like that. So then over here, we also have staff. The staff section is really identical to the student section in form and function. It's just where you would track your staff. I think the most important part of that is, again, when you have a new staff member, you need to enter them into AESIS and create that staff profile as soon as possible so that we can connect that and get them their account. The other important piece is their education level and teacher experience. Those are things that we track. And there are quality points associated with having a certain number of instructors and program leadership staff who have advanced degrees. So make sure you're coming back, looking at this, updating it periodically if someone finished their master's, finished their doctorate. Another note, you do not have to use the individual social security number in the system. You can use, there's a process for the student side to use a center assigned ID. You can do that for instructors, but there should not be the same restrictions on the staff social security numbers as there are for the student ones. So we don't validate those. So come look at these, update as needed. On the other section, there's student and staff rollover. That's how you would move student or staff profiles from one fiscal year to the next. We'll go over that a little bit later in more detail. There's the validate data section. The file exchange is where you can securely upload student information, as email is not a secure way in which to share student data. Follow-up collection, we'll go over that a little bit later too. The forms section, where you can find the initial documentation of disability form and also the WIOA consent form. That's a consent form used by all of the core WIOA programs, so Kansas Works, vocational rehabilitation, to sort of navigate the sharing of information, mostly on the back end across WIOA title programs. The help section, we have an FAQ and locations of our adult ed centers. And then under the AESIS manual section, we have stored the AESIS manual, which you should be able to download and go through. My internet must be being slow. But I downloaded it yesterday, so I know that it should work. If you can see this section down here, the student management tools, that's currently not used. We may revive that here in the future. We've been trying to kind of work through things there, but for now you can just ignore that section. So one of the most important functions of AESIS, the Adult Education Student Information System, is to collect adult education student information. That's reported to us by the local programs. We then use that. There are some reports that we provide back so that programs can track their progress. But the primary function of this system is to allow us to do our required reporting to the U.S. Department of Education, specifically OCTAE, the Office of Career Technical and Adult Education. We are required to submit federal reports October 1st of every year for the data reports and our data quality checklist. So it's very important that we have the best, most up-to-date data possible at all times. That way we can validate data, we can identify if there are any issues. Then sort of the secondary, but still very important function of AESIS is to provide reports for us at the state level, for you at the local level, to be able to look at what your progress is, track that, and hopefully make data-informed decisions during the course of the year. You can look at student progress, you can look at progress by class. That way you know if you need to make any changes. You could do that while the students are still in class instead of looking at the data a year later and saying, gosh, I wish we could have done something different. So it's very important. I know it's often difficult when your primary role is to teach students to care about the data that you collect, the data that Big Bad K-Board wants, that you're required to get from your students. But it's really important to remember that in Kansas, individual programs are funded based on performance. At the federal level, our programs are constantly looked at as to whether they're effective, whether it still makes sense to spend money on those programs. So what I have always tried to tell everyone is that it does not matter if you're the best instructor in the world. If your students make the most educational gains, they go on to have successful careers in our post-secondary education. That's great in and of itself, but it's a lot more hollow if we don't have the evidence to back that up, to demonstrate to the federal government that the program's effective, to the state government that the program's effective, and that we should still provide money for these programs. So it's very important to get that data from students, even if sometimes it seems like an afterthought and like the least important part of your job.
Chris, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Go back to what you just said, the difference between in Kansas reporting and the effect of that and in federal. What did you say about Kansas?
Kansas funding is based on performance.
Okay.
And that performance is based on the documentation that you provide. So when a student takes a pre-test and post-test, you enter that into the system, and that's how we know what your individual program's performance has been. And that's how we know how much money to give your program.
Okay. And then and then you said as federal, it was based more on what?
Federal programs are formula programs, often based on Kansas's share for adult education is based on census data and need. But at the federal level, you know, we're constantly asking for increases in funding or asking not to be cut. So the important piece there for the federal level is documenting our success so that we can still justify that Congress allocate money towards our program.
Okay, and does that include, like, if somebody, probably everybody else knows this, but does that include if someone gets the GED and then gets a better job and then continues and gets other, is that what they're really looking at on the federal level?
Yes, so our core performance metrics are, we have measurable skill gain, which is an ed gain pre-post testing, a student exiting adult ed and entering post-secondary in the same program year, or a student completing the GED. Those are really the only classroom-based measures that we have. The rest of them are employment based. So is a student employed after they leave our program? Are they making a good wage after they leave our program? And that's where we'll talk about with the follow-up collection here in a little bit. It's important that, you know, student data collection doesn't end when the student leaves. It really, that's when it starts, because that's when we have the most difficult time getting information from the student. They're either not, they've forgotten about us, they don't care if they give us the information, or they're not looking for us to be asking information back from them. So it's just really important to make sure that we're getting all the information we need. But yes, you are correct that you know, it's not only their classroom successes, but it's also, are they leaving employed, making a good wage?
Okay, thank you.
So for adding us, we're kind of going to go through the process of adding a student, because it also allows us to discuss the different data elements we collect, how important each one is, when we might need to update those. So we're going to go here on this AESIS main page. We're going to go to add student. And this is what will come up when you have a blank student profile. And you'll see all of the different tabs for collecting student data here across the top. Student info, which is your student demographic data. Current tests, where you'll store their TABE or their TABE Class E scores. Hours for hours of attendance, outcomes. We have several outcomes that are tracked or tagged automatically. There are a couple that you still might have to manually enter once a student has achieved a certain outcome. Technology and pre-employment, where we would have the ACT National Career Readiness Certificate or North Star data entered. A student's assessment history, college readiness if they've met any college readiness standards, AOK if they're participating in the AOK program, GED, which is where their scores should auto-populate. We'll talk about what you need to do to make sure that happens. The WIOA consent page, if a student has decided to fill that out, and then there's also a summary page. So going through that, the first thing we always want from a student is Social Security number. There's a lot of misconception about Social Security number. We really, really want it because it makes some of the other data collection and reporting that we do easier, but we under no circumstances can require that a student give it to us. There are some other programs that might, there's some employment programs, things like that, that might require a Social Security number. But for our program, we do not require one. We cannot require one. We also cannot assume that because a student doesn't give us a Social Security number, that they don't have one. So all that being said, if your student is willing to give you their Social Security number, please take it. Because that allows us to do some data matching for those employment type outcomes that we're looking for after students leave, and pull that data in automatically, and it makes everyone's lives a lot easier. If you do not have a Social Security number for a student, you can enter a student or a center assigned ID that will begin with an A. And then your institution will have a code. If you have a question about what your institution's code is, you can send me an email and I will email that out. But those would start with an A. When you give a student a center assigned ID and they're in multiple fiscal years, please make sure that you try to use the same one. That way, when it comes through in our system, we do nightly checks for duplicate students at an institution, between institutions. So if they come back and you enter them with new one, we're going to end up asking you, is this the same student? Is it not? So that we have our back end data in order. So again, social security number, if you can get it from the student. I know most of your documents have social security number listed on there. That is okay. You just can't deny a student services if they don't fill it out or they don't give you one. Another important data element is program entry date, but this is one that's sometimes a little iffy because we might be collecting data from a student in June, but they don't plan on starting classes until July. So with this, use your best discretion. If you're collecting the last week of June for classes that start in July, you can use July 1 as your entry date. Just use the thing that makes sense, whether it's the first day of class, the first day of the month. That's the most important part, is that we have it so that we can kind of track when a student entered the adult ed world. Then first name, last name's pretty self-explanatory. Those are required fields. Any field with an asterisk we have to have. Middle name is optional. You can give it to us if you want. When we're talking about that GED match that I mentioned earlier for test scores pulling in, when we match to GED data, we match on first name, last name, date of birth, not middle name, not gender, not address, zip code, not social security number. So please make sure that you ask your student if they are pursuing the GED. They are often going to sign up for a GED account based on what name they want on their diploma. So if you have a student that goes by Steve, but their full name is Stephen, or you have a Joseph who goes by Joe, make sure that you ask them, what name are you going to use for the GED site? What name do you want on your diploma? And that way you can have these match up so that that data will pull in automatically and we don't have to run down an issue later. So suffix, if you have one, you can select this drop-down box. Gender, we've talked about this several times on the Perkins side. Currently, for federal reporting, there are two genders. There's male and female. There's not an other, do not identify. For this, use what the student tells you. And if the student tells you something that's not here, let me know. We'll try to go through that then. For date of birth, enter the student's date of birth. Something to remember for those of you that might be rolling students over, we're going to talk about this more in the next AESIS series. We record student age on entry. So if you've rolled a student over or you haven't yet entered their program entry date, you need to enter that, and then you'll need to tab through to the age on entry to start that automatic process that will calculate their age. Reporting race, again, whatever the student identifies as, these are the federal race and ethnicity categories that were given. I think with the addition of 2 or more races, which didn't used to be there, I think we're pretty all-encompassing again. If there's something here that you're not seeing, or that the student is telling you and we need to do something different, please let me know. For address, city, state, county, please spell out the county. Don't give the 2-digit sort of a license plate abbreviation. We do use these for things, and it's nice to have the full county spelled out. Residence area type, there's a definition that we can get to. Rural is generally less than 5,000 people, and then urban area would be more. So select the correct address type, put in your zip code, make sure you've got the right zip code, even if you have to look up a student's address, because we do use zip sometimes. Native language is something that we haven't had any issues for a while. There's a very long list of languages here. We have had in the past students come in and their language that they speak isn't here. If that's the case, let me know. It's easy to add languages to this. It's not our place. Yeah, anyway, we can debate the language piece, but it's not our place to tell a student that their language isn't considered a language, that's a dialect. So if you need something added, please let me know. And then country of origin, same thing. Some students come from a place that a certain government might not recognize as an independent country or as a country with a certain name. If we need to add something, we can. Phone number, emergency contact. You can enter anyone the student gives you. In the past, we've used emergency contact as not just an emergency person that we would call, but also someone we might call if we've lost contact with the student themselves, so their phone gets turned off. Often they'll list a parent or a grandparent that might have a more stable phone number. That's up to you to put on your intake documents whether or not you're going to use that person as a general contact. If the student sort of disappears for a while, just make sure that you're disclosing that to the student. So email, collect that. The phone number, email, and address that you list here will be the ones that are eventually generated on your follow-up survey document. So for your benefit, once you enter a new student, it might make sense to come back periodically and make sure that their phone number is current, that their email is current. I know the programs have been doing this for a long time, but it never hurts to remind you that we need to make sure that we have fresh information for the student. So then you would say if your student's incarcerated in a state correctional facility, you would click yes. Then you would, if they are a yes, you would enter their state inmate ID number and their earliest possible release date. We are required to report on the recidivism rate of any incarcerated student, or the recidivism rate of all incarcerated students who participate in our program every year. For us at the board office, it makes it much easier if we know if that person is getting out of prison anytime soon. If they're not, we know not to look them up. It really cuts down on our workload. So please make sure that you're entering that information, the inmate ID as well. That makes it easier to look them up. I know earliest possible release date can shift depending on programming or behavior. It is fine to just keep the earliest possible release date at entry. We're not comparing this with anything. We're just using it for when we collect that data, we look up recidivism, that we know whether or not in general a person has been released yet. Highest grade of education completed. There are a lot of options here. Employment status at entry. When we start getting into multiple periods of participation, this is something that would need to be updated along with their program entry date. Then you would list whether or not their education was US based or non-US based. And then if they're a distance learner means that they spend more than half of their time online. Realize right now could be everyone. That's okay if you're listing all of your students who are participating in online education as distance learners. If they're over that half threshold, there's nothing extra you have to do after that. It's just we have a subset report that we give to Octave on the success and the performance of our distance students. Barriers. Those of you who've been here a while may remember that this is a big deal. This was one of the things that Octave made us change when they came for their pleasant visit a couple years ago. These need to be updated every period of participation, and you need to have conversations with your students about these. These barriers are used for the Federal Statistical Adjustment Model. So when we look at our performance and our performance targets that we have to meet with the U.S. Department of Education, if they give us a target of 45% for measurable skill gains, if we are serving populations that are harder to serve, if we had our target is 45%, we performed at 40%, based on the type of individuals that we're serving, the populations we're serving that are quote unquote harder to serve, using their statistical adjustment model, that could be bumped up. Our 40% with the populations we serve could be the same as 45 or higher. Therefore, it is extremely important that we accurately report. I think for the current year, we only reported that 400 of our students were low-income individuals. It's possible, but not likely that the number's that low out of 6,200 students. Part of it is, this is self-attestation. A student may not want to admit that they're low income. They may not want to admit that they have a disability, but I think there are ways to ask students about whether or not in these categories. Sometimes it's defining the category. Low income individual is for a single household. It's under about $16,000. Those amounts change yearly. So part of it can be in the way that you're giving it to students. We'll talk about this at one of our, hopefully at KEA, talk about strategies for collecting barriers to make sure that we are accurately reporting these. So you have to select an answer to each one of these. AESIS will not allow you to save the profile until you have done so. So make sure that you click the answer, but please don't just click all no's and say you'll get back to it later. You are required to collect these. It is extremely important when we're looking at our performance down the line. Then in this next section, we have the different program types that a student could be in. If they're a veteran, if they're participating in one of our other programs like AOK at Work, Innovations in IELCE, which is a mini grant that we've done in the past, Integrating Academics, AOK, STAR, IELCE. If they're having their GED or their materials fee paid for through CanCare, you would select that. Just make sure that you're tagging a student with these flags, because we use these to be able to pull special reports, and some of them we have to do extra reporting or breakout reports for the feds on. Primary advisor, you'd select the instructor that's their primary advisor. Sometimes that would be the only instructor that's at a site. Sometimes that would be the primary instructor. It's really a program decision how to designate that. Then for these next couple referral source. There is a report that you can pull that will give you sort of a breakout of your referral sources, but this is a free form data field. So you can put in, whatever you put in will also show up on that report. So make sure that you're consistent with your language. If you're using it from a particular place, I'm going to click save real quick because I'm about to get logged out. Oh, I didn't enter all mandatory fields. So we'll get there in a second. AESIS will automatically log you out after 20 minutes, just so you know. So referral source notes, you can never have too many notes. There is really no limit to how large the section can be. This is kind of your place where you would tell us about anything particular with the student that you would need to relay, or within your program, or relay to us. If we see something off with a student record or something that looks out of the ordinary, we'll often check notes to see if there's an explanation before we reach out to the program and ask. Then we have the releases. So every student in your program should sign, and I got kicked out. So every student that's in your program should sign a general FERPA release. So you would click yes that they've signed that. And then again, going back to that automatic GED data match. We match on first name, last name, date of birth, but we will not pull that information into AESIS unless you have indicated that they have signed the GED release form, giving us permission to give that information to you. So make sure you have that on file. Make sure that you have put in a date of when the student signed it. Then we're going to go back through here real quick. As I go through this, are there any questions about data entry, the data elements that we're collecting up to this point? Okay, so we'll get these very important barriers saved. We've asked the student. And then you would click save. All barriers need to be checked. See, if you don't click them all, it won't allow you to save. Thanks, Ilse. All right. So again, before we move on, are there any questions? Sorry, I stopped sharing on purpose. I wanted to check one thing. All right. So we've been going for about an hour. I originally have set the meeting to go to 4, so that I'm not just running everyone ragged. How about we take a 5-minute break real quick, since we're at about the top of the hour, and we'll get started again about 3:05. All right, hopefully everyone was able to check email, maybe grab a drink. We'll go ahead and get started again, going through some more of the data elements. This next part should go faster. It's always going through the demographic and program information one by one always takes the most time. For current tests, I think this is pretty self-explanatory. The page looks very busy, but there's room for multiple post-tests for a student that's been in the program for a long time. So whether or not the student is an adult ed, ABE, ASE student, or an ESL student, maybe also a citizenship, you would put in their valid pretest. The appraisal here is only something you'll put in if you're doing the paper pencil version. If you're doing the online version, there's no need to record the appraisal. Then down at the bottom, we have the level ranges just for your reference that convert a student's scale score to their entry or their NRS level. When you're testing a new student, I know it really depends on what the student's coming in for. A question we get a lot is if a student comes in, they're just working on their GED math test. That's what they need help to would help if I shared my screen again. That's what they need help to pass. Do I need to pre-test them in language or in reading? The answer is no, you don't have to. But if the student is willing and the student has the time to take those tests, it's still a good idea. A change from how we did things a long time ago is we can now record an educational gain in any subject area in which a student is pre-tested and post-tested. Sometimes, even if they're just there for math, they will also come in with, they might achieve a reading gain. So if the student's willing to take the tests, I'd go ahead and administer them, enter them into the system. But again, in that situation where the student is there for a very specific purpose, you can just go ahead and test them in that one area. So when you're entering a student's scores, for those of you who have write access, you would enter the form that they took, the date that they took it, and then the scale score they received. We're going to just do all 568s for this one. Once you've entered the tests and you click save, you'll have a pop-up that comes up for the first time that those are entered. It'll give you some of the lowest test was reading. It's been automatically chosen for entry-level classification. You can click OK. AESIS will automatically place a student into the lowest level that they score. All things being equal, like we have the 3 test scores are the same. If every one of them is the same, it will choose the first one, which is reading. Currently, and this is for those of you who've been in adult ed for a while, it does not matter what subject area or even what entry level a student has. Like we said before, we can achieve a gain in any subject area. We even record a gain if a student passes the GED test. So really their entry level is just a designation on a report for what line they're going to be listed in. So don't agonize over their entry level. Don't agonize over what subject area to level a student in. There's no need to change it. Even if a student, they don't want to study reading, they're here to study math. You can change it if you want to. But again, it's not going to matter when it comes time to post-testing. If you post-test them, enter their post-test. They can demonstrate a gain in any area. So hours. Another very important thing, we need to track student attendance. We need to track a student's last day of attendance. So when you're entering student hours, you'll be asked for the last date of attendance. You can't save this page until you've entered that. So make sure that you do so. As far as class codes, that's entirely a program decision. You can use whatever class code and class type you want. AM, PM, those completely up to you. You can select which staff teaches and whether it's an afternoon, morning, or weekend class. Again, this is mostly for your program's benefit to be able to track the classes. These class codes, you will be able to pull student performance data based on the class code. So it would be beneficial that you not make them all the same if you want to differentiate. I know depending on the location and the program, you might have courses broken out by level, by subject, by time of day. So just make sure that you're entering that however your program thinks that it best suits them. So you'll save that. You'll need the last date of attendance in there. Like I said, total hours will always be at the bottom of this page, hours and minutes. On the summary page, that kind of shows the breakout of a student's profile. You can see the student's class codes. You can also see their total hours here. So outcomes, like we mentioned earlier, many of these populate, well, a couple of them populate automatically. Made educational gain. You can see when I entered Steve's pre and post test scores, he achieved an ed gain here. So that has already been recorded by the system. Received GED high school diploma. This will populate based on the scores that automatically pull into the system that we'll talk about in a couple tabs. Placed in post-secondary education training, achieved citizenship skills, increased involvement in child's education, increased involvement in children's literacy activities, and demonstrated college readiness are all things that your program is responsible for marking. So if you're an instructor, if you're a data entry person, it might be a good idea for you to check these every once in a while. Make sure if you think a student has demonstrated college readiness, we'll talk about those criteria here in a moment, that has gotten marked and that your program is getting credit for that. Placed in post-secondary education and training, the minute you know that someone has transitioned, go ahead and check that box. that way we can account for that in our reporting. Reason for leaving, there are a lot of reasons. So one of the things when we're talking about leaving and exiting, under WIOA, we cannot exit a student from our program until they have been absent for 90 days with no future planned services. So what that means is that individual programs can no longer enter an exit date. The system calculates that automatically using that last date of attendance that we saw under the hours. So that's why it's important to keep this last date of attendance updated. If your program is waiting too long to enter attendance, we've had programs in the past where they missed hours or they didn't get them updated on the schedule that they needed to, and a student was exited and they shouldn't have been. We then have to remove that exit date, go back, update the data. And I think that's a good reminder for everyone that student data should be updated weekly. That is an assurance that was signed as part of your institution's grant application. So we need to make sure that that data is being entered in a timely fashion so that we kind of avoid those issues in the future. So once a student has an exit date in here that's been populated by the system, you can come back and you can choose their reason for leaving. There are these family problems, things like that, couldn't find, lost contact with, conflict of employment, these other reasons. Pay attention to these two. If a student is institutionalized long-term in the hospital, that's something we don't want, but especially right now, if a student can't come to class for long-term, or they are hospitalized, or a student passes away, please select these if any of those criteria apply, because that actually allows us to pull them. We don't have to report performance on those students. Criminal offender is if someone is incarcerated, not you're serving someone in a correctional facility. That's they were in your public program, they were arrested, there were court proceedings, and they have now left the community to go to prison. That's the only time you would select the criminal offender reason for leaving. Or if a student was ineligible, but usually we wouldn't get to that point. So if you have more questions about these in the future, reach out to me. We can talk about them in depth, but that's for when a student has that exit date, which would be 90 days after they've left. Technology pre-employment, this is where you would enter your North Star module scores, pre-test, post-test, dates completed. Microsoft Office testing, if you have students taking the Microsoft Office tests, go ahead and enter if they achieve those certifications and the date they've completed them. If your students are taking the Work Ready, the test formerly known as Work Ready, that is now the National Career Readiness Certificate, go ahead and enter their scores and their date. And then if they are issued a certificate, you would put the certificate level here along with the number and the date they received. We use those for quality points. Assessment history, nothing will show up here for the student because they're new, but usually if you've had a student that's rolled over from one fiscal year to the next, you would see a history of the assessments they've taken. Sometimes across POPs that will also show. College readiness. So we have a couple of ways a student can demonstrate college readiness. We're going to be getting rid of some of these legacy, asset, compass, things like that. But if a student takes the AccuPlacer, if they take the ACT, enter those scores. For the AccuPlacer or the ACT, you will have to manually enter the scores and you'll have to manually check that they demonstrated college readiness. The bar here is for the institution they are enrolling in. So if you're at Johnson County Community College in your adult ed program and someone's enrolling in Johnson County, the bar for demonstrating college readiness is that they are above the level, above the cutoff for entry into developmental education. So if they're going straight into those gateway courses, college algebra, English composition 1, in all subject areas, they would have met the criteria, demonstrated college readiness. If you're at Johnson County Community College and the students enrolling in Washburn University or Washburn Institute of Technology, their cutoff scores might be different than yours. So check the cutoff scores. If the student's above those, then you can select that they've demonstrated college readiness. TABE on this screen would populate automatically. They have to get fairly high scores to demonstrate college readiness using TABE. Again, for this one, that populates automatically for TABE, GED, and work keys. It would populate automatically on this screen, but you would still need to go to outcomes and select demonstrated college readiness. So I know that that's been sort of a misconception in the past, because the cutoff scores for developmental education, remedial education are different across Kansas institutions. We haven't been able to automatically do this section, which keeps us from automatically populating that outcome. So AOK, many of you participate in the Accelerating Opportunity Kansas program. If one of your students is co-enrolled in a career technical education program through AOK, this is where you would track that CTE program progress, so to speak, through the enrollment date. The enrollment date here would be the date that they started the AOK program. So this might differ from their adult ed entry date. So if they started in July, and let's just say that this individual started today in the AOK program, you would put that entry date. Pre-enrollment date was something that was kind of used in the past. If your institution's still using this as a day they started a pre-AOK at your institution, you can continue using that, but it is not a required field. If an individual is TANF eligible, you would want to mark that. And then just general information, previous occupation, if you know it. Some of these are left over from when we were doing an evaluation of the AOK, but it's still data that we like to collect because we can use that to demonstrate how effective the program is. Date exited AOK, when they completed their AOK pathway, reason for exiting, hopefully completed requirements, but select the reason here that best fits this situation. The occupation, their general occupation code when they're leaving, hopefully they're employed somewhere, and then whether they're employed full-time, part-time, or we don't know. This test institution does not have an AOK college tied to it, so we don't see any programs here. But at your institution, you would see the approved AOK pathways that you have. So CNA, CMA, welding, plumbing, engineering technology, things of that nature. Once you select that, the sector focus and the occupational focus should automatically populate. And then you would put whether or not the student's currently employed in the field. And then if there's a credential associated with that pathway, it would show up here so that when the student obtains that credential, you can select that credential's been obtained. any technical skill attainment tests they may have taken or things associated with that would show up here, and then you could put the date. Any questions about the last couple tabs?
I have one about
Yes.
the AOK, the completed requirements. What is the completed requirement mean that they've passed the state test, or that they've done all the requirements before the state test, or do you know that?
It would be that they've completed all the courses in a pathway.
Okay. But not necessarily passed the state test yet?
Yes, so it kind of depends. That's a tricky one because sometimes if we use our healthcare pathways as an example, there's a state test very early in that sequence. So
Yeah.
it would be once they've completed all of the classes and any associated credential tests. Does that help?
Okay, so if they just took CNA and they haven't gone beyond that, is that CNA just one part of the pathway?
Yes, so you would put down here that they have obtained that credential, the CNA credential, but they would not have completed the requirements of the pathway because they just took the first course and credential in that sequence.
And if they do not pass the state test, then they have not obtained a credential, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Good questions. So the next tab in the line is the GED tab. Pretty self-explanatory. As we've discussed before, when we data match for a GED, for GED scores, we're looking for a student's first name, last name, date of birth, and to pull the information in that they've signed the GED release form. When all those boxes are checked and we find a student, I'm going to simulate this right now. This information would be automatically populated. So you would be able to pull up a student's AESIS profile, go to the GED tab, and then you would see their scores there. They will populate daily. So I think that process runs at 10:30 or 11:30 in the morning. So then you'd be able to see, even if a student's only taken one test, that one test should show up. That's when you know a student has taken tests, because the scores should show up even if they didn't pass. If you're not seeing scores populate, that's a good time to check the names, first name, last name, date of birth, that you've checked that they've signed, and that you've checked that they've signed the GED release. And if things still aren't populating, reach out. Sometimes if a student has multiple GED.com accounts, or they've had accounts merged, or they took some tests in another state, there are scenarios where our system won't pull it in automatically. We might have to address that manually. But by and large, I think we've worked a lot of the issues out with the process, and we pull the tests in very successfully. So we owe a consent form. If a student fills this out, chooses to fill it out, indicate that. They could fill it out and you've authenticated that the student is who they say they are. You can do that with a driver's license, passport, state issued ID. Doesn't have to be a US driver's license, doesn't have to be a US passport. Any government issued ID will suffice for this. And then you would list the agencies that they've consented to sharing data with. And then the date. The reason there are dates and times for all of these is because a student can change this. They can change it at any WIOA title program. So they could come at 3:29 p.m. with you, fill out this information, and then decide at 3:31 that they want to change. They no longer want to share information with the Kansas Department of Education. Nope. One note, we've talked about this before, but a student filling out this form does not mean that we are automatically sharing their information with all of these entities, or that we're broadcasting it, or that it goes into some central database so that anyone at these agencies can look it up. In order for us to share the data, what we have to do is they would have to consent with us and with another agency. And even then, we don't share a lot of information. It's the WIOA performance measures. So, you know, we've had some concern in the past that we were just going to give out all of our students' information to all of these other government agencies. That's really not the case. We're sharing de-identified information. We're sharing only if there's a match with another program and a student has agreed that each program can share that information with one another. So, you know, this isn't required for students to do, but it's definitely something that helps out in our state and federal reporting process for other agencies. So if you have questions about the WIOA consent, let me know. We can talk about it more in depth. So that kind of encompasses all the student data entry. Once you've entered the data and clicked save on everything, the student's information will be there. You can go anytime you pull up a student, it will default to this summary tab that I talked about at the very beginning, so that you can kind of see student social security number, primary advisor if they have one, their name, courses, the class codes they're in, their assessments, educational gains, instructional hours, entry date, last date of attendance. If they've exited, there will be an exit date populated. You'll be able to see if they've taken the GED, and then any outcomes, and then some notes. So any questions about student data, about this student summary page? Okay, so I think that kind of covers the data that we need to get from you. We've talked a little bit about data, what data is important, how it's important for you to give us accurate data, timely data, updated data. things that we need to be able to track and report on our program performance. From this point, I think for just looking at basics, there are a couple more things that we want to look at before we're done for the day. One of those things is reports. AESIS has a lot of built-in reports. Some of them are older. Some of them have been updated. There are a lot of things that you can find out in AESIS, but it can be overwhelming when you first start. There are three main areas where the student reports are stored under this student information block. So under reports, you'll see there are quite a few here. The ones that we're going to really hit on today are things that you might want to look at just for your general program makeup, general program performance, and then things that you can drill into for the instructor or the course level. So up here at the top are some demographic summary reports. I think the go-to ones and ones that we report aggregated for the state to the feds are this reports 2, 3, and 4. So participants by age, ethnicity, and gender, participant status and category enrollment, program type, and age. When you click a report, it will usually open in a new tab. So this is displaying all of the students in this test institution in an age group, age, ethnicity, gender, that have 12 or more hours. 12 hours is that baseline for participant status in adult education. So we have more students entered into AESIS for this program, but they don't have enough hours to populate on reports. So your report will be much more robust. You will have multiple age groups, ethnicities, genders, but this is an example of what that would look like. Program status and category enrollment. You'll be able to see on entry employed, the different types of programs, IELCE, if you have those selected. So you'll see that information here. Program type and age, adult education, adult basic education, adult secondary education, integrated education training, IELCE would show up here. Again, I would encourage you to pull these reports for your institution. That way you have an idea of what your program looks like. Look at previous years too, so that way you can compare where are we this year, have we seen a shift in students moving from adult basic education to ESL? Do we have population shifting? Do we have ages shifting? Do we have employment status shifting? Those are all things you can look at, you can compare. And if you're looking at them enough, you can kind of discover those trends in your program. And then if you need to make an adjustment mid-year, you need to change curriculum, you need to change focus. Those are things that you can address as you go along. Another report that I would recommend you look at is the measurable skill gain report. A note about this report, it only updates once per day based on some information that we're pulling from multiple sources. So currently, this is displaying every student in this program that has 12 or more hours. So we only have one, we've talked about that. Leveled in ABE level 4. 57.2 total hours. We're not showing any measurable skill gains, but we talked earlier about how that student already has an ed gain, which would show up here in this column D. But because this report only populates once per day at about 10, 11:30 in the morning, you don't get that instant gratification on this report of, okay, I just entered post-test, where are we at? For that, you have to wait till the next day, or there's another report we can look at that is updated live just for pre-post tests. But this is really, again, we're looking at student performance that we measure while they're with us. So I would encourage you to go pull this for your program for last year, this year, 2019, compare year by year, see where you're at based on where you were last year. And then a note, we've had a couple times programs want to look at, so year over year, where were we first quarter, second quarter, third quarter. As we talked about, AESIS is a cumulative data system. So there's no way to go back and just compare quarters. But if you go in and you pull this information for the state level, we report to the Kansas Work State Board every quarter. So we have historical data for what was our Q1 2020 performance, what was Q2. And then if we look at Q1 2021, where were we? Were we higher? Were we lower? Looking at those things, then you can again start to make those data-driven decisions, try to make some adjustments, figure out what's different now from last year. Hopefully you're only looking at positive changes, but any change, it's a good idea to investigate and see why that's happening. So this is a good report. If you want that instant gratification for educational gains, the C2 report, Ed Gains Complete, you can see that we have one level 4 student who has an Ed Gain. So we're currently at 100% Ed Gains for pre-post testing. So that one's updated immediately. You have to wait once a day to get your updates for table 4. Another report that I would recommend that you pull for your program is this table 5 follow-up achievement. So this is, we talked about earlier with those employment-based outcomes that we're held accountable for. This is where you would be able to see those. I will go ahead and show, you get an idea of what the report looks like. We can look at last year's statewide. I can share that data with you. So yours would look like this, much smaller. So for our core performance measures, we have measurable skill gain. We looked at that report already. This one shows some of those other employment ones, like employment second quarter after exit, employment fourth quarter after exit, median wage. And then we have credential attainment. And this report sort of breaks out the general credential attainment. And it shows us, so of individuals who finished the GED, that would be attained a secondary school diploma or its recognized equivalent, how many enrolled in post-secondary education or training within a year of exit? How many were employed within a year of exit? How many obtained a post-secondary credential while enrolled or within that year of exit? You might see a commonality here within a year of exit. And then how many individuals obtained any credential? So you'll see the number of individuals who are in that cohort, because these cohorts don't necessarily run on the traditional fiscal year cohort, because we're looking at people from different points in time. So even though this report is a 2020 report, we're really looking at students who are in our programs in 2019. That's why the number of participants who exited, that's really just a term or a phrase that describes the cohort group we're looking at. But that's why employment second quarter after exit, there's a different number of students than there was for fourth quarter after exit. But you can see the number of individuals who were employed for those two cohort periods, the percentage, and then you can see the difference between individuals, unduplicated count, and then for periods of participation. You can see our median earnings when you're looking at that for that program. Keep in mind that this median earnings is how much that individual earned in the entire quarter, that second quarter after exit. So if you wanted to annualize this, get an idea of their yearly income, you would just take that times 4. So for a state, for this cohort period, we were a little over $20,000. Something I think we would all like to see be a little bit higher. And then you can see for these specific cohorts, how we're doing on GED plus post-secondary education, GED plus employment, just any post-secondary education, any credential. So take a look at that for your program, get an idea of where you're at. We've had a lot of discussions about these exit-based performance measures, and well, after my student leaves, I don't have any control over what they do. And that is a little bit true, but I think that's a cop-out for us to say, no, we cannot make a student go to college. No, we cannot make a student get a good job, but we can provide them the programming and the opportunities they need to be as successful as possible post-exit. We can also follow up with that student, not just to ask them the questions. Are you employed? Where are you employed? What are you making? You can call that student a week, 2 weeks, a month, 4 months after they leave. Hey, when you left, you said you were going to enroll in Washburn Tech or Barton Community College. How's that going? Did you do that? No. Well, why not? Did something come up with work? Do I need to help connect you with someone on campus? Or with these exit-based performance measures, our duty to the student and our duty to the state and federal government that's funding this doesn't end when a student leaves our door. That's really, Kansas has always really done a great job with ed gains, measurable skill gains. Now we need to do a great job with making sure that our students get good jobs, that our students get into post-secondary education, get the training they need to get a career and start making a wage, so that we can, blow it out of the water with our performance for the employment-based measures as well. So with that, I'll kind of step off that soapbox for Table 5. Look at your individual institution. You won't be able to pull it for the current year. So because we're always looking at students who've left 6 or 12 months ago, there is no 2021 data yet. So you'll need to look at 2020, see what's there, look at 2019. You're not going to be able to go back much further than that because these are new performance measures, and we just last year got to the point where we have full cohorts. But look at those, think about the things your program's doing, and the things that you could do differently to help impact the performance in those areas. Any questions about those basic reports? If you're a Read user, I'd encourage you to just play around, click pull reports, find information. If you have questions, ask someone else in your program, reach out, ask me. If you're a Read user, you can't break anything. Even if you're a Write user, you can't break anything by pulling reports. look at them, figure out what's where, what information you want. Sometimes we have a lot of information in AESIS. Sometimes, though, you might have to combine information from a couple reports. Just let me know. We've been trying to make incremental updates, kind of get reports that people need. We haven't made a lot of changes in a long time now, but if there are things that you need that you're not getting, let me know. We'll see if we can get it. We do have to pay for development time, and we have to make sure that our data team has the availability to make those changes, but it's something that is possible. So just let me know. Another couple things on this, polling by level to see how your students are performing in a particular level, polling by primary advisor. This would look differently for your program, but you can look at performance for an individual instructor. You could look for a class code. Kind of see how a particular class is performing. Do you need to change curriculum? Do you need to figure out what's going on? Is your class performing well? Is there something that you need to replicate from that class to another class? Just begin looking at the data for all of those things and getting a feel for your program, where you're at, things that you can do differently. There are many other reports here, but we're kind of coming up on that 2-hour mark. There are a couple more things that I want to hit, but again, just play with the reports, see what's there, see what you need, and then we'll talk a little bit more about those in our next AESIS training. So the last two things for the day are going to be file exchange and the follow-up collection. We'll go to file exchange first. Disclaimer or a notification. I think we all know that email is not a secure form of communication. You shouldn't be sending student information over email. You definitely shouldn't be sending it to anyone at KBOR. We have a very strict policy on what we consider personally identifiable information. We're very strict with our FERPA guidelines. You should not email me student information, even a name. For that, we have the file exchange. So we'll click here. You can see some sort of test files that we've had uploaded before. So you can upload information into this system. It is secure, and I can go in and I can look. So if you have questions on student GED not populating, if you have questions on pre and post testing, and you need to send me student information, do that here. So from that main page, you would click file exchange. This functions sort of like, it's not drag and drop. It functions like attaching an attachment to an email used to. So you'd click choose file, and then you would need to upload a PDF, Excel file, any Word or any Office document will work, text files. So you select the file that you're wanting, you click open, and then you would click upload. That will then become available for me. I can click that, download it on my end, and then I can open that, and then I can look at the student information you want me to, try to figure out if there's an issue, if things aren't meshing up, data's not matching, and we can do it like that. So again, please use that file exchange. Is a valuable tool to be able to share student information in a secure format. The next thing, last but certainly not least, is the follow-up collection. We have an online video that goes a little bit more in depth on how to do the follow-up collection. If you are a read user, more than likely someone at your program will be downloading this collection and giving you a list of students to follow up on. So once your collection has been populated, there are two cohorts of students that you're going to be following up on. Those who it's time to ask about their second quarter after exit, and those it's time to ask about their fourth quarter after exit. Important thing for those of you who are downloading and uploading these files, you download 2 files, you upload 1 file. So, but that's kind of a topic for a more advanced time. So we're going to gloss over that a little bit, and we're going to look at what this file looks like. Let me So this is that Q2 file. We only have 1 student that we need to follow up on, John Smith, and we're following up in the first quarter of 2021. Again, we've got the name, social security number, date of birth, phone number, email, exit date for the student. And then we have the date range that we're asking the student about. So when we're asking about employment for second quarter, we're asking about wages, we're asking about the entirety of the second quarter after they left. We're not asking them about their second quarter, we're asking them about 2 quarters after they exited from adult education. So for this person, we're asking for the time frame between April 1st, 2020 and June 30th of 2020. So that would have been, it's irrelevant, but for their Q2 survey, we're actually asking about the fourth quarter of 2020. So you would ask them, hey, John, you know, were you working during that time? You would put a Y or an N if you're actually entering the information that's going to be uploaded. Where were you working? How many hours were you working? What wage were you making per hour? If a student tells you, I work about 20 hours a week, but I get paid $500 every week, please enter an hourly wage. We have to convert these to a quarterly wage. So we ask for the information from you in hourly format, but please make sure you're giving that to us correctly, because then we're then going to convert that to a quarterly value. For this student, we're only asking about this time frame, and then we're going to upload this file. Once it's uploaded, in about 6 more months, we're going to have this student pop up again, and we're going to be asking about the fourth quarter. During that time, you're going to be able to see the information you entered during the second quarter. You can also update that, or you can put it in if it's the fourth quarter survey, but you never got a response from the student during the second quarter, but now they're answering their phone. You can fill out both of these at the same time. And then during any time frame, you can ask them about, have they enrolled in post-secondary education? When did they enroll? Have they earned a post-secondary credential? What is that credential? When did they earn the credential? A note for the dates that I almost forgot is that they go in 4-digit year, 2-digit month, and then 2-digit day format. So if a student earned their credential today, that would be 2020-09-16 for 9/16/2020. Survey date, and then who they were surveyed by. You can have about the length of think it's 120 characters, so a little less than a tweet for this box. So you can say Chris, you could say, you know, they answered, or you can say Chris did not answer if the student didn't answer. That way you can kind of track for the future. But you know, once you've given this information back to the person who's responsible for compiling it, they'll compile that all into one file, which they will then upload. Let me just as a refresher for some of you, when you're uploading this, you need to make sure that it stays in that CSV format. You have to delete the headers. As we've talked about in the past, it is best practice to save this as sort of, you know, FY 2021 Q1 one record or 2 records, because that's one of the things you have to enter when you're uploading it. But in the interest of time, we're not going to do that. So once this has all been compiled, those 2 files into one with all of your survey information, you would click upload, put in your number of records, and again, we will go over this more in depth later. Choose the correct file, click upload, and hopefully you get this box that says upload was successful. If it says that it's unsuccessful, there are a couple things we can go through. You can contact me and we can kind of walk through that. Once you have uploaded that, you would run edits, which will kind of make sure that all the values you've entered are correct. You might get this, your files are clean. That means you're all good to go. And then you would need to lock that collection. So that's kind of a very quick and dirty run through of what the follow-up collection process looks like. As far as upload, the most important thing is start your follow-ups early. Those surveys are available the first day of every quarter, as long as you have uploaded and locked your previous quarter. So please do not get behind. This again, we can data match a lot of our data, a lot of our information, but we don't get everything. And that's why, especially for students, again, remember back to the very beginning when we talked about Social Security number, we cannot require it. Students don't have to give it to us. If we don't have a Social Security number, that kind of prevents us from doing the data matching, especially with employment-based outcomes. So that makes the follow-up survey extremely important. It means you need to take it very seriously, start early. You need to start telling your students as soon as they enter that you're going to bug them, ask them for information after they leave the program. Sometimes it helps to remind them that this is how they can pay it forward to other people. We don't charge for our program, but this is how we continue to justify that our programs are effective and that we need to continue getting funding. Build that trust and that relationship with the students early. That way, when you're contacting them later and you're asking them very personal questions about where are you working, how much you making, that they are more likely to provide that to you, so that we have a better picture of what our statewide performance is, and hopefully we're demonstrating that we are performing well above other states, other programs, and we can continue to do the work that we do. So with that, that's kind of the end of the program for this, this session for AESIS Basics. There's a lot of information. We've been here for about 2 hours. Does anyone have any questions? Is there anything I can address before we head off for the day? Not from Mary. Did you have a question, Mary?
Oh, no.
Oh, you unmuted yourself, so I thought maybe you had something to say.
No, I was having computer issues.
Oh,
I was
no.
having unstable email and unstable internet.
No, that I've been there.
Yeah, I know.
So any questions? Well, I will hang out here on the line for a few more minutes in case anyone has anything they'd like to go over. This has been recorded and we will upload it to YouTube channel, and we'll send out the link once we're done.